I never thought the place I called home would turn into a nightmare. It started with a few friendly visits from the HOA president, but before I knew it, my wife was at the center of attention, and not in a good way. Rules were suddenly bent, boundaries crossed, and the people meant to protect our community were tearing my life apart. What would you do if the very folks running your neighborhood fell for your wife, and you started losing everything that mattered? Stick around to see how it all unfolded. And if you enjoy real-life drama, please subscribe. Your one subscribe truly means a lot to me. Before everything went sideways, my life was about as steady as you could hope for. I'd worked hard for decades, saved up, and finally settled down with my wife in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood just outside a small American town. We weren't rich, but we had what we needed. A comfortable house, a tidy yard, and a sense of belonging. My wife Linda was the heart of our home. She loved her garden, spent hours tending to her roses and tomatoes, and always had a friendly word for the neighbors who strolled by. Our street was the kind of place where folks waved from their porches, and you could count on someone to lend a hand if your mower broke down. Most of us were retired or close to it, and we took pride in keeping our homes looking sharp. The HOA was always there in the background, sending out newsletters about lawn care, organizing the annual block party, and making sure everyone followed the rules. For the most part, it worked. The place stayed clean, quiet, and safe. Linda fit right in. She joined the garden club, baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, and even helped organize the 4th of July picnic last summer. People liked her. Maybe a little too much, as I'd soon find out. I was proud of her, and I never thought twice about the extra attention she got. After all, she was just being herself. But looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. The HOA president, Mr. Carter, started stopping by more often. At first, it was just to compliment Linda's flowers or ask her opinion on the new landscaping plans. He'd linger a little longer each time, always with a smile and a story. I figured he was just being neighborly, maybe a little lonely since his wife passed away a few years back. Still, something about the way he looked at Linda made me uneasy. I brushed it off, not wanting to seem jealous or paranoid. We'd lived here for years without any trouble, and I trusted the people around us. But the visits kept coming, and soon, Mr. Carter wasn't the only one dropping by. Other board members started showing up, asking Linda to help with community projects or attend special meetings. She was flattered, and I was happy to see her so involved. Then the letters started arriving. At first, they were just friendly reminders about lawn care or upcoming events. But soon, they turned into warnings, tiny infractions, like a garden hose left out overnight or a flower bed that didn't meet the approved color scheme. It felt like we were being watched, and the pressure started to build. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just the HOA doing their job. But deep down, I knew something was off. The rules seemed to change overnight, and Linda was always at the center of it. The attention, the warnings, the sudden interest in our home. It all felt too personal. I didn't know it then, but our quiet life was about to be turned upside down, and the people we trusted most would be the ones to do it. At first, I tried to ignore the little things. A warning here, a note there, just the usual HOA business, I told myself. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. The letters from the HOA started coming more often, and they weren't just friendly reminders anymore. They were citations, each one more nitpicky than the last. One day, it was a complaint about the color of our mailbox, which had been the same shade of blue for years. The next, it was a warning about Linda's garden. Apparently, her roses were encroaching on the common area, even though they'd never been a problem before. Linda tried to laugh it off at first. She'd say, "They must be bored if they're worried about my flowers." But I could see it was getting to her. She started double-checking everything, measuring the distance from the flower beds to the sidewalk, making sure the trash cans were hidden away before sunset, even trimming the hedges twice a week. It was like we were living under a microscope, and no matter how careful we were, it was never enough. The real trouble started when the fines began. The first one was for $50, supposedly for improper storage of gardening tools. Linda had left her trowel and gloves on the porch after a long day in the yard. The next week it was $100 for unauthorized plant species. Someone on the board had decided her new hydrangeas didn't fit the approved aesthetic. We tried to fight it, but the board meetings were a joke. Every time we spoke up, Mr. Carter would cut us off, insisting the rules were clear and that everyone had to follow them. It wasn't just the fines. The board started showing up at odd hours, snapping photos of our yard, jotting down notes on their clipboards. I'd catch them peering over the fence or standing across the street, pretending to check their phones while they watched our house. Linda stopped working in the garden as much. She said she didn't want to give them any more reasons to complain, but I knew it was more than that. She was starting to feel like a prisoner in her own home. The neighborhood started to change, too. People who used to wave and chat now crossed the street to avoid us. Some neighbors whispered that we were troublemakers, and that we must have done something to deserve all the attention from the HOA. Others just looked away, not wanting to get involved. It was like we'd been marked, and nobody wanted to be next. One afternoon, I came home to find Linda sitting on the porch steps, a stack of letters in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes red. "They sent another one," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This time, it was a notice of violation for excessive outdoor decor. Linda had hung a small wind chime by the front door, a gift from our granddaughter. The letter said it was distracting to the community aesthetic, and threatened another fine if it wasn't removed. I felt something snap inside me. I'd had enough. I marched down to the next HOA meeting, determined to speak my mind. The room was packed, but as soon as I started talking, Mr. Carter interrupted. He read off a list of our supposed violations, his voice cold and rehearsed. When I tried to defend Linda, he just smiled and said, "We all have to follow the rules, sir. No exceptions." After the meeting, Mr. Carter pulled me aside. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You know, your wife is a real asset to this community. We'd hate to see her get caught up in all this unpleasantness." The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. Things only got worse from there. The board started targeting Linda directly. They sent her personal letters, inviting her to exclusive HOA events and asking for her input on new projects. When she declined, the fines increased. When she agreed, Mr. Carter would monopolize her time, keeping her away from me and the house for hours. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just said she didn't want to make things worse. One night, I found Linda sitting in the dark, staring out the window. She looked tired, defeated. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said. "It feels like they're everywhere. I can't even enjoy my own garden." I tried to comfort her, but I could feel her slipping away, like the life we'd built together was being chipped away, piece by piece. The next morning, we woke up to find a notice taped to our front door. It was a formal warning. If we didn't correct our ongoing violations within 30 days, the HOA would begin legal proceedings to place a lien on our home. I felt sick. We'd done nothing wrong, but it didn't matter. The board had all the power, and they were using it to make our lives miserable. I started keeping a journal, documenting every letter, every fine, every strange encounter with the board. I took photos of the yard, the mailbox, the wind chime, anything they might use against us. I even installed a security camera just in case. But no matter what I did, it felt like we were losing ground. Linda became more withdrawn. She stopped going to the garden club, stopped baking for the neighbors. She barely spoke at dinner. And when she did, it was just to ask if I'd checked the mail. I tried to stay strong for her, but I was running out of ideas. The stress was getting to both of us, and I could see it was taking a toll on our marriage. Then, one evening, I caught Mr. Carter standing at the edge of our yard, talking to Linda. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the look on his face made my blood boil. He was smiling, leaning in just a little too close. Linda looked uncomfortable, but she didn't pull away. When I walked outside, Mr. Carter straightened up and gave me a polite nod before walking off. That night, Linda told me she'd been invited to join a special committee for the HOA, HOA group that would meet privately to discuss important community matters. She said she felt pressured to accept, that Mr. Carter had made it clear it would be in our best interest. I told her not to go, but she just shook her head. "If I don't, they'll never leave us alone," she said. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, letters, and mounting fines. Linda was gone more and more, always at some HOA event or committee meeting. When she was home, she was distant, distracted. I tried to talk to her, to remind her of the life we'd built together, but it was like she was slipping through my fingers. One day, I came home to find the house empty. Linda's car was gone, and there was a note on the kitchen table. It was short, just a few lines. "I can't do this anymore. I need some time to think. Please don't try to find me." My heart sank. I knew the HOA had pushed her to the breaking point, but I never thought it would come to this. I sat in the empty house, surrounded by the reminders of the life we'd built together, and wondered how it had all gone so wrong. The HOA had started with petty rules and fines, but now they'd taken everything that mattered to me. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't give up. Not yet. As the sun set outside, I realized this fight was far from over. The board might have all the power, but I still had the truth on my side, and I was ready to do whatever it took to get my life back. But little did I know, the worst was still to come. The days after Linda left were a blur. I moved through the house like a ghost, haunted by the silence and the empty spaces she'd left behind. Every room was a reminder of what we'd lost. Her favorite mug on the kitchen counter, the half-finished puzzle on the dining table, the garden outside that was starting to wilt without her care. I tried to keep up appearances, mowing the lawn and trimming the hedges, but it all felt pointless. The house was just a shell now, and I was barely holding it together. But the HOA didn't let up. If anything, they doubled down. The letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. They accused me of neglecting the property, of letting the yard fall into disrepair. They threatened more fines, more legal action. I could feel the walls closing in, and for the first time, I started to wonder if they'd actually succeed in driving me out. One morning, I found a notice taped to the front door, HOA, formal summons to an emergency HOA board meeting. The letter was cold and clinical, accusing me of ongoing violations and disruptive behavior. It said my presence was required, and failure to attend would result in immediate legal proceedings. I knew what this was. They wanted to make an example out of me, to show the rest of the neighborhood what happened to anyone who stood up to the board. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. Photos, letters, copies of every fine and warning. I even printed out the emails Linda had received from Mr. Carter and the other board members, the ones that had started out friendly and turned increasingly personal. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was all I had. The night of the meeting, I walked into the community center with my head held high, even though my hands were shaking. The room was packed. Neighbors, board members, even a few people I didn't recognize. Mr. Carter sat at the head of the table, flanked by the rest of the board. He looked up as I entered, a smug smile on his face. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "We're here to discuss your ongoing violations and the impact they've had on our community." I took a seat, clutching my folder of evidence. The meeting started like all the others. Mr. Carter reading off a list of supposed infractions, the board nodding along in agreement. But this time, I didn't let him control the narrative. When he finished, I stood up and faced the room. "I know what this is about," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't about my yard or my mailbox or a wind chime. This is about power. It's about control. And it's about the way this board has targeted my family, especially my wife, for reasons that have nothing to do with community rules." There was a murmur in the crowd. I could see a few neighbors shifting in their seats, glancing at each other. Mr. Carter's smile faltered just for a moment. "I have proof," I continued, holding up the stack of letters and emails. "Proof that this board has gone out of its way to harass us, to single us out, and to make our lives miserable. I have emails from Mr. Carter, personal invitations to my wife, and warnings that have no basis in the HOA's own bylaws. I have photos of board members trespassing on my property, taking pictures without my consent, and I have documentation of every fine, every warning, every threat. I laid the papers out on the table for everyone to see. The room went quiet. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across the faces of the board members. A few of them leaned in, reading the emails and letters. One of the neighbors, a retired lawyer, stood up and asked to see the bylaws. He started flipping through the pages, comparing them to the violations I'd been accused of. Mr. Carter tried to regain control. "This is highly irregular," he said, his voice rising. "We're here to discuss your behavior, not the board's." But the damage was done. The neighbors started asking questions. Why were the rules being enforced so harshly against one family? Why were there so many personal letters to Linda? Why had the board ignored similar violations from other residents? The more they pressed, the more defensive Mr. Carter became. Then, out of nowhere, Linda walked into the room. She looked tired, but determined. She walked straight up to the table and placed a folder in front of the board. "I have something to say," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I've been keeping records, too. Every meeting, every conversation, every time I felt pressured or uncomfortable. I didn't want to believe it at first, but it's all here." She opened the folder and began reading from her notes. Dates, times, direct quotes from Mr. Carter and other board members. She described the way Mr. Carter had singled her out, the way he'd used his position to manipulate and intimidate her. She talked about the pressure to join committees, the late-night phone calls, the feeling of being watched. The room was silent. Even the board members looked shaken. Mr. Carter tried to interrupt, but Linda held up a hand. "I'm not finished," she said. "This isn't just about us. It's about the way this board has abused its power and the way it's hurt this community." By the time she finished, there was no doubt left. The neighbors were angry, some at the board, some at themselves for not seeing what was happening. The retired lawyer stood up and announced that he would be filing a formal complaint with the State HOA Oversight Committee. Several other residents voiced their support, demanding an immediate vote to remove Mr. Carter from his position. Mr. Carter tried to protest, but it was over. The board voted, and he was removed on the spot. The rest of the board resigned in shame, leaving the community center in stunned silence. As I stood there, watching the fallout, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. We'd won, but at what cost? Linda and I had been pushed to the brink, our marriage nearly destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect us. But in that moment, as the neighbors rallied around us, I realized we weren't alone. We'd stood up to the bullies, and we'd come out the other side, scarred, but stronger. But the story wasn't over yet. There were still consequences to face and lessons to learn. And as Linda and I walked home together, hand in hand, I knew we had a long road ahead. The days after the board meeting felt like waking up from a long, exhausting nightmare. For the first time in months, the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel threatening. The stack of letters on the kitchen table stopped growing. The mailbox, once a source of daily dread, was finally empty of threats and warnings. I could breathe again, but the air felt different, lighter, but also unfamiliar, as if I was learning how to live all over again. Linda and I spent the first few days in a kind of daze. We didn't talk much about what had happened, at least not at first. There was too much to process, too many wounds that needed time to heal. She spent hours in the garden, her hands in the dirt, coaxing life back into the flowers that had wilted during the worst of it. I watched her from the porch, grateful just to see her outside again, doing what she loved. The neighborhood changed too. People who had once avoided us now stopped by to offer apologies, casseroles, or just a kind word. Some admitted they'd been afraid to get involved, worried the board would turn on them next. Others said they simply hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. It was awkward at first, but slowly, the old sense of community began to return. The block felt less divided, more like the place we'd moved into all those years ago. The retired lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, kept his word. He filed a formal complaint with the State HOA Oversight Committee, and within weeks, an investigation was underway. The new interim board, made up of neighbors who genuinely cared about the community, opened the books and found a mess of questionable fines, missing funds, and personal favors that had been swept under the rug for years. Mr. Carter's actions weren't just unethical, some of them were downright illegal. The state got involved, and soon, Mr. Carter was facing charges for harassment and misuse of HOA funds. The story made the local news, and for a while, our quiet neighborhood was the talk of the town. Reporters showed up asking for interviews, but Linda and I kept our distance. We'd had enough of being in the spotlight. The new board worked quickly to undo the damage. They canceled the bogus fines, refunded the money to everyone who'd been unfairly targeted, and rewrote the bylaws to make sure nothing like this could happen again. They set up regular town hall meetings where every resident had a voice and a vote. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. People started showing up, sharing ideas, and working together to make the neighborhood better. For Linda and me, the healing took longer. The scars from those months of harassment didn't fade easily. There were nights when I'd wake up and find her staring out the window, lost in thought. Sometimes I'd catch myself flinching when the mail arrived, half expecting another threat. But slowly, we found our way back to each other. We talked, really talked, about everything that had happened. About the fear, the anger, the sense of betrayal. About how close we'd come to losing everything, not just our home, but each other. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. We learned to lean on each other again, to trust that we could get through anything as long as we faced it together. Linda went back to the garden club, and this time she was welcomed with open arms. The other members apologized for not standing up for her sooner, and together they started a new project, planting a community garden in the park at the end of the block. It became a symbol of everything we'd been through, a place where neighbors could come together, share stories, and watch something beautiful grow out of the ashes. I got involved too. I joined the new board, determined to make sure no one else ever went through what we had. It wasn't easy. There were still disagreements, still the occasional petty squabble. But the tone was different. People listened to each other. Decisions were made openly, with input from everyone. The power games and backroom deals were gone, replaced by a sense of shared responsibility. Looking back, I realized how close I'd come to giving up. There were days when it felt like the fight would never end, when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But standing up to the board, speaking out in front of my neighbors, and seeing Linda find her voice again, it changed me. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward, as long as you don't let fear win. The experience left its mark, but it also brought us closer together. Linda and I learned to appreciate the small things. Again, a quiet morning on the porch, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the laughter of kids playing in the street. We stopped taking our peace for granted, knowing how quickly it could be taken away. The neighborhood, too, was forever changed. The ordeal brought people together in ways I never expected. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now looked out for each other, checking in, sharing meals, and lending a hand when someone needed it. The sense of isolation and suspicion that had crept in during the worst of the board's reign was replaced by a new spirit of community. There were still challenges, of course. Not everyone was happy with the changes, and there were a few holdouts who missed the old ways. But for the most part, people were grateful. They'd seen what could happen when power went unchecked, and they weren't about to let it happen again. As for Mr. Carter, he disappeared from the neighborhood after the charges were filed. I heard he moved in with a relative out of state, but I never saw him again. The board members who'd supported him either resigned or quietly faded into the background. In their place, new leaders stepped up, people who understood that a community is built on trust, not fear. Sometimes I still think about those months, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being hunted in my own home. But I also remember the moment when Linda walked into that board meeting, her head held high, and spoke her truth. I remember the neighbors who stood up, the friends who came back, the garden that bloomed again after the storm. If there's one thing I learned, it's that you can't let fear or intimidation steal your voice. No matter how small you feel, no matter how powerful the people against you seem, you have a right to stand up for yourself, your family, and your home. And when you do, you might just find that you're not as alone as you thought. So if you're watching this and you're facing your own battle, whether it's with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone else who thinks they can push you around, don't give up. Document everything. Find your allies. Speak up, even when it's hard. Because sometimes, the only way to change things is to refuse to back down. Linda and I are still here, still tending our garden, still waving to our neighbors as they walk by. Our home isn't just a house. It's a testament to what we survived, and a reminder that even the toughest storms can pass. And as I sit here, looking out over the yard we fought so hard to keep, I can't help but wonder how many others are out there, quietly fighting their own battles, waiting for someone to stand with them. Maybe, just maybe, our story will give them the courage to do just that. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to our story. If you found something in it that spoke to you, please leave a comment and share your own experience. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Your one subscribe truly means the world to me. You never know whose life you might change just by standing up and speaking out.